Just going to wait a couple of moments to allow people to join, and then we'll get going. Okay, I think let's start. Hopefully, if a few people still need to join, they won't miss too much at the start. So thank you all for dialing in and listening to our webinar today. We are talking more about enterprise technology, buying habits, and talking about the types of technologies that enterprises are investing in and how they're making those technology purchasing decisions. So today you have myself, Chloe from CCGroup. I'm head of connectivity, looking at enterprise technology and connectivity requirements for businesses. I'm also joined by my colleague Chris, who heads up our analyst relations segment at CCGroup, a Hoffman agency, and we're delighted to be joined by James Pearce, who is the editor-in-chief at Tech Informed. Wonderful. And then just a few housekeeping rules for us today. We have a chat on the webinar, so if you have any questions, feel free to pop those into the box, and we'll make sure that we get to those at the end. If you have a burning question that you'd like to be asked, and answered during the discussion, then make a note, and we'll try our best to do that. Otherwise, yeah, we'll go through our research and our findings, and we can have a productive conversation at the end. We'll keep this probably to about 45 minutes. And yeah, I think that's the main housekeeping rules. So firstly, we're going to hear from James, who's going to talk a little bit more about the enterprise technology landscape and some research that Tech Informed have done recently about enterprise technology buying. Over to you, James.
Well, thank you very much, Chloe. And hi, everyone. It's great to be able to speak today. So I'm going to talk us through a survey that we did at Tech Informed called our Voice of the Buyer Research, in which we spoke to 2,000 tech decision makers from across America, North America, Europe, and Asia last summer to try and find out what was really going on with the market and how enterprise executives at enterprises and IT decision makers were coming about reaching their decisions in terms of what they were buying, what technology areas they were looking at, and also what the kind of main drivers behind their decisions and how they were making decisions were. But just for some background, if you're not aware of Tech Informed, we are an enterprise tech publication. We launched in 2021, the end of 2021, and essentially we are very case study led. We like speaking to enterprises specifically about their digital transformation journeys. We kind of get down into what those decision makers are really thinking when they go through their journeys, how they pick their vendor partners, and how they go about really reaching the choices that help drive them into a digital future. So as we were going through digitization, and certainly coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a lot of challenges for enterprises, and they had to really make a lot of decisions very quickly in order to kind of update their tech stacks. So the research we took in summer, if we can have the next slide, please. And we were speaking to organizations, aiming essentially organizations of over 200 employees and above. So that one of the first kind of questions we asked was how they go about evaluating new technology solutions within the organization. And what we found was almost half said that they're looking at it on a regular basis, which I think is really positive for the industry because it shows that there's a real drive. We're at that point, that kind of tipping point where making changes to tech and buying new tech is really, really important to strategies going forward. But at the same time, there's that kind of journey can vary quite greatly. So even though it was slightly ahead for monthly or quarterly, some are only looking at it on a kind of semi-annual or annual basis, and 14% were saying rarely or when needed. Next slide, please. What was also interesting was we had a look at the kind of tech budgets and the IT budgets and how those were changing. Surprisingly, perhaps almost half had said that they had a moderate increase, but not significant. 20% was increased significantly, and 32% was no change. So it shows that there is investment going in, but because of the kind of situation that the economy's been across the world, growth hasn't necessarily been the fastest, that the investments have been incremental rather than massive. There are obviously some major investments going in, but in terms of those budgets, they're coming from existing budgets rather than new opportunities or only slight increases to deal with the digitization. Next slide, please. So yeah, we tried to break down the percentage of IT budget and how that was allocated. And what we found is there's just, perhaps unsurprisingly, quite an even split. Um, Obviously, more than half is going towards updating operations and investing in new technologies. I think that says a lot about where we're at as an industry, because essentially we're not in a position where it's about where the tech investments are there to increase revenue necessarily, but they're there to update existing infrastructures and to help deal with operations and make things more smoothly. And it kind of ties into some of the research that we're going to come to in a second. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the bit that I found most interesting was we tried to look at what the top priorities for the organizations were, and every person we spoke to identified connectivity as one of their top priorities. Now it was multi-selection, so but for everyone to say that, and I'm going to come on to why that's important in a second, but also nobody will be surprised to see AI and automation on there, as given it's the hottest topic in the industry at the moment. Data and analytics making up a very, very important part. Cybersecurity was perhaps slightly lower than I expected it to be, but that's because I think sometimes awareness when it comes to cybersecurity, there's a feeling that yes, it's important, but it doesn't actually threaten individual companies as much, even though that's not true at all. There's kind of a feeling that cybersecurity is already being dealt with by IT departments or by CSOs, and privacy and customer experience made up the top choices. Next slide, please. So yeah, just artificial intelligence, want to touch upon that because as you've seen everywhere, the amount of press releases I get on a daily basis about AI, if I had $1 for everyone, then I would be richer than Elon Musk. Let's put it that way. There's a lot going on with AI, and we're seeing all those developments, but it's also really captured the zeitgeist, has really captured the public imagination in a way that technology hasn't for quite a long time. So 40% of respondents said they're currently implementing AI and machine learning technologies. Now, this can range from anything from fairly basic automation right through to agentic, generative AI. But what was interesting was it's so many of them were saying they were already doing something with AI somewhere on their roadmap, whether it be small projects or whether it be significant overhauls. But between those and the ones who are planning to implement it, you're talking 75%, three-quarters of companies are already kind of in that phase. And then there was barely anybody who isn't looking at it in some way, shape, or form. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned cybersecurity, and obviously it continues to be a high focus for everyone. It's so important, and in terms of the kind of coverage that we have for Tech Informed, it's one of our kind of three major areas that we hit, along with connectivity and along with AI now. 85% have said that they had moderate or substantial budgets dedicated towards cybersecurity, which is interesting when you look at kind of the priorities list that we went through. So they accept that they need to invest a lot of money into cybersecurity, but at the same time, it's not the thing that's most front of their mind. So they're kind of putting the money in to defend themselves because they're aware of the costs if there's a cyber attack, if they're a victim of a DDoS attack, or even worse, a ransomware attack. It can cost a significant amount of money. But at the same time, it's not necessarily seen as the biggest priority on their roadmap. Next slide, please. And just wanted to mention, I mentioned connectivity, and I think it's really important to note with 100% of people on that previous slide saying that they were looking at connectivity as to the reason why. And it's very, very simple, actually, when you think about it. Without good connectivity, without having the right mobile network or the right fiber network going into your, say you own a factory or you own a shop or anything, then a lot of these other solutions become completely unviable. You can't run AI without having decent connectivity. You can't, cybersecurity, you could become victim if you don't have good network connectivity. And connectivity for us also includes things like cloud, which was a huge one, and as well as the networking side of things. So when we're looking at the emerging technologies that are going to have the most significant impact, no surprise to see that AI machine learning is there. Obviously, once you dig down into that, it kind of ties with the investment that we touched upon, but 5G and advanced connectivity are really, really important. Now, the one that surprised me most out of the study was how much people are looking at quantum computing, given that it is several years before we don't really see many use cases in quantum at the moment because it's such a early stage technology. But at the same time, it shows that buyers are really, really thinking about it. Some of that is to do with the cryptographic nature and kind of making sure that they can defend against it. So we had people from big banks kind of highlighting some of the challenges that they're going to have in cybersecurity and where it ties into quantum. But others are they see the opportunities of really improving their compute capabilities through quantum. Again, blockchain feels like it's kind of tailed off like it was yesterday's story, but there's still 27% looking at blockchain as a big future technology, and AR and VR the same. If you go back a few years, go back to when Tech and Bone first launched, and it was the year of the kind of the metaverse, and yet it never really took off to the same level as expected. But companies certainly in retail, and in healthcare are still looking at AR and VR as a really big opportunity. Next slide, please. So yeah, once you start looking at the kind of areas of the business that are most impacted by digital transformation, customer experience was a really big one that was pulled out. And obviously that goes across multiple sectors. So there's the kind of opportunity to use AI to improve customer experience. And we're seeing it a lot with kind of agentic AI and agents that are replacing chatbots now and in a much smarter and much more engaging way. But operational efficiency continues to be one of the biggest areas as well. And it's not really a surprise because improving operations is so important to so many different sectors. And product and service innovation still had a good showing. While business model transformation and employee engagement were a little bit smaller down the priority list for most businesses. Next slide, please. So yeah, that's just a taste of the study that we did. There is significantly more available on the Tech Informed website, and we'll be publishing some more data from it over the coming month. But essentially, the just as a kind of key recap, AI, cybersecurity, and connectivity are the three biggest concerns for people, or bigger, but also seen as major opportunities. A lot of the challenges are centered around budget, talent, and alignment, and we've got a lot more of that in the study itself. Influence, investment, and innovation are growing. It's really we're really at that point where digital innovation, digitization, becoming more and more important to companies, but also more important to more sectors. Um, one of our conclusions was that basically it's a tipping point. Companies need to either transform or be left behind, and 2025 is a really big year for that. And that comes from the buyers themselves. They see it as a really big year for investment. But yeah, if you want to read any more of this study, or see some of our amazing case studies where we have a lot of massive enterprises talking about their journeys and their implementations of different technologies, whether it be AI, connectivity, cybersecurity, or more, then please go to techinformed.com. And that's it from me. Thank you. Hand over to Chris.
Wonderful. Thanks, James. It's all really very interesting. And yes, interesting to see how sort of the landscape and the technology priorities are changing, as you say. Blockchain and sort of VR AR were the sort of the big hype technologies just a couple of years ago, and now, you can't move without seeing mention of AI. So yeah, really interesting stuff to see. I'm just going to talk a little bit now about some of our research that we've done, which sort of aligns and tallies very nicely with what James has just been discussing. So whilst the tech-informed research was slightly more global in remit, our research focused a lot more on the UK market. So we interviewed 200 technology buying decision makers in the UK to understand a bit more about, what's driving their technology buying decisions, the types of technology that they're buying, and what resources they're referring to when they're sort of trying to identify vendor partners, and yeah, as similarly what resources they're referring to when they make that decision. So just to touch on, firstly, what's hot in the enterprise tech space. So um it's something James mentioned as well. There's no denying the economic environment is tough. It has been for the last couple of years. There's a need for businesses to, as James said, run more efficiently, so make those cost savings. But businesses have lots of priorities. They need to think about customer satisfaction, employee experience. They need to think about, how they're driving new revenues, how they're going to grow, whether they're going to enter new markets and geographies and things like that. And technology plays a pivotal role in, meeting all of those business needs and goals. So despite the economic outlook, enterprises really do need to continue investing in technology to make sure that, they're able to survive and thrive, really. So when we looked at what are the drivers for purchasing new technology, a need to increase revenues, unsurprisingly, comes out at top. And increase efficiencies as well comes in at third. It's also quite interesting to see some of the other areas that enterprises are looking at, and there's not too much difference if you look from top to bottom in terms of where they're trying to invest. So I think it sort of outlines that message that enterprises really have a lot of challenges, or lots of areas that they need to focus on, and it's really about where they're going to prioritize first. There's keeping up with the competition, there's looking at the quality of their data, but there's also improving their internal systems, and then obviously you've got things like regulations and ESG initiatives that they have to contend with as well. So there's clearly lots of priorities there for enterprises to get their heads around. I've just skipped one slide too many. And then when we look at the types of technology, it's nice to see that this aligns with what James and the Tech Inform team have looked at and have analysed as well. So unsurprisingly, AI and automation come out on top. Our data is split out a little bit more, so you can see that connectivity piece a bit more clearly. But cloud, as James mentioned, and private networks are those top technologies as well that enterprises are discussing and thinking about. And I think that again mirrors perfectly with what James was saying, right? You can't do these digital transformation efforts without having the technology in place to be able to support those. So that's definitely a key requirement. And I think it also echoes that, enterprises are looking at the technologies that can help and impact them in the here and now. So AI and automation are obviously those technologies that can support with those cost savings and those operational efficiencies. Whereas things like quantum computing are probably a bit more out of touch and out of reach. I just wanted to touch here on AI specifically as well, and about enterprises' attitudes towards AI as well. So within our research, we asked these technology decision makers about their sort of attitudes and views towards investing in AI. And over the next 2 to 3 years, the majority of enterprise technology buyers are cautiously optimistic about the potential of AI. So cautiously optimistic is, where they're concerned about the risks outweigh the value of the technology itself. However, after 3 years, we see optimism increase. So 34% say they're highly optimistic about the technology, with 38% cautiously optimistic. So still, still those worries and those concerns, but I think it's a case of the implementations need to happen before enterprises can be really rest assured that the investment brings around the return. And then looking at the key technology considerations, I think it's good to understand how much enterprises are spending and how often they're making these purchasing decisions. So James touched on this a little bit where it was good to see that some of the investments are increasing, and that tech buying is being looked at often. From our research, a typical tech investment is just over 250,000, and a purchase typically takes about 6 months from start to finish. Again, it's unsurprising that cost and value for money are the top drivers, or the top attributes, should I say, around vendors when they're making their final purchasing decisions. They want to make sure that they're spending their money on the right technology. It's quite interesting to see, though, that reputation ranks third. So whilst enterprises want to invest in the technologies that, provide that value, they also want to make sure that they're investing in the right partners. And it's quite interesting to see that that actually trumps areas like expertise and ease of integration as well. And then just a few additional tech buying considerations that happen as part of the process. So it's really quite interesting to see the rise in the request for sustainability policies and diversity, equity and inclusion policies as well as part of the process. So 2/3 of enterprises are requesting sustainability policies, and just over half for DEI as well. So I think it's clear to see that enterprises want to make sure that they're working with like-minded partners. There's been quite a lot in the news recently about some of the big players sort of doing 360s on some of their policies and promises that they've made in the past. So I think it is really important for enterprises to make sure that they're working with like-minded partners. And it's not just part of sort of the awareness process, but when we're looking at selection, 82% say that the sustainability policies are important as part of that criterion, 87 for DEI as well. So it's not just a sort of tick box when they're looking for vendor partners, it's something that they do consider when they're selecting their partners as well. And then finally, I don't think we can really talk about enterprise technology without talking about the channel. So, it's clear that channel partners play an important role in the technology buying process. So, you can see here that over half of the decisions, technology is bought, through partners in some capacity. So, the channel is obviously a very important part of the technology buying puzzle. Then just looking at the channels and the types of content that enterprise tech buyers refer to when they're selecting vendors. So when we look at the marketing channels that are being used to learn more about a vendor, enterprises are going to industry analysts, they're looking at the business technology media, and management consultants as well. But as you can see, there's not much difference here in terms of the top of industry analysts and live events that sits at the bottom. There's less than a 10% difference between the two. So it's interesting to see the role of industry analysts rank out top, but we can see that, advertising, trade media, channel media, peers, web search all play an important role when trying to identify vendor partners as part of the long listing process. And then how that changes when selecting a vendor partner. Industry analysts still rank on top, so it's clear that third-party validation is really important as part of the technology buying process. And peers jumps up quite a lot when we look at the selection process. So, enterprise tech buyers going to colleagues or industry acquaintances to see if, to see their opinion. Live events is interesting as well. Do they have a presence at those events? helps play into that as well. And then of course industry trade media ranks here as well. So I think it's clear here that having integrated marketing and making sure communicating across all channels is really important. And then when we look at the specific types of content that tech buyers are referring to when they're trying to identify a vendor partner, so have they seen them at an event speaking? Have they had any email marketing from them? Have they been included in industry analysts? And Chris will touch upon later about the importance of industry analysts throughout the whole process. But again, there's not much difference between these areas here, but it's interesting to see that that reputation piece seems to come through here in terms of how vendors are presenting themselves to the industry when they're trying to identify a partner. And then when we look at the selection, so what are they using once they've got their shortlist? What materials are they referring to? What content types are they referring to when they want to make that final decision? It's those industry analyst reports that are helping. It's case studies. James mentioned Tech Informed is very case study heavy. Enterprises want to see those use cases, those the technology in action, and sort of what have the metrics and results been. Email marketing still helps here, and then you've got things like blogs and white papers as well, again, that help support with the reputation angle. And now I'll hand over to Chris to talk a little bit more about the importance of industry analysts, because we've seen they're very influential throughout the whole technology buying process.
Yeah, thanks, Chloe. And yeah, as Chloe mentioned, obviously we see in the research that analysts come out very influential both as a channel and through their reports. Vendors are relying on them to, learn more about solution capabilities and support procurement decisions. So I'll going to dig a bit deeper into some of the research. So we can split the research by vertical. So we focused on financial services, retail, and healthcare, and we can also split the data by company size, so we can kind of get more of a clear picture about where that analyst influence is strongest. If I could have the next slide, please, Chloe. So yeah, we asked the respondents what % of their deals involve analysts. So be that using advisory sessions, using reports to learn more about service providers and solution capabilities. And we found on average 55% of IT purchases involve analysts in some way. Which is a pretty high amount, quite astonishing, really. And then in the key verticals that we wanted to focus on in the research, we actually found this influence increases. So it rises to 59% in healthcare and retail, and 56% for financial services buyers as well. And next slide, please, Chloe. And then when we look at company size, we found that larger enterprises are more likely to work with industry analysts on their deals. So 56% of companies with 1,000 to 5,000 employees, 56% of their deals involve analysts. And this rises to 65% of deals in companies with over 5,000 employees. This is like we suspect this is down to two things. First, larger deal sizes in bigger companies mean that there's going to be more due diligence involved. So having that third-party validation of the technology and then making sure technology works for a particular enterprise's challenges is really important. And also, obviously, larger enterprises are more likely to have subscriptions to Gartner or Forrester or whichever firm it might be, and access to inquiry data where they're using analysts more regularly to support with strategy. So yeah, for vendors looking to sell into larger enterprises, I think having an effective analyst relations program becomes even more important to capture that influence that analysts have on those larger companies. And then we also asked, as Chloe mentioned, what channels have the biggest influence on vendor awareness. Analysts were the most influential channel, and 72% of the respondents said industry analysts are a major influence on vendor awareness. And again, we saw a little bit of variation across the verticals that we surveyed, with retail and financial services buyers more reliant on analysts for learning about vendors. But having said that, across all of the verticals that we focused on, that influence was still incredibly strong. Next slide, please, Chloe. And then like looking at company size, we again saw that trend of larger companies tending to use analysts more. So, 79% of buyers in sort of mid-sized firms of 1,000 to 5,000 employees are using analysts as a channel for vendor awareness, and that rises again to 82% for firms with more than 5,000 employees. Again, I suspect probably down to just having access to research and advisory sessions. But again, the headline really is that all the verticals and all the company sizes that we surveyed, that analyst influence on vendor awareness is very strong, and I think makes it an incredibly important channel for vendors to use when as part of their marketing mix. Next slide, please, Chloe. Thank you. As Chloe touched on earlier as well, we also asked buyers which content types they're using to drive to learn about vendors. Again, analyst reports come out really influential. So 39% of our respondents said that analyst reports are a critical resource for them, ranking them in the top 5 most valuable content types when they're learning about vendors. But we again see that trend of larger companies really using analysts more. So 41% of respondents in firms with over 5,000 employees really rank analyst reports very highly as a key resource for them when they're trying to learn about vendors and solutions. And next slide, please, Chloe. And then just one last one from me, just in terms of the channels that are influencing vendor selection and that all important vendor selection. We again saw that analysts are a really massive part of that procurement process, and vendors are really using them to make sure that they're choosing the right technologies. So 71% of buyers ranked analysts as a highly influential channel when it comes to selecting vendors. Interestingly, we saw in financial services, this was even higher, with 80% of respondents ranking them as highly influential. Maybe not surprising given the kind of regulatory and compliance requirements on financial services, so maybe not surprising that they're using third-party expertise and validation to make sure that they're choosing the right solutions. So again, if you're looking to sell into financial services buyers, analysts are a really important channel for you to be engaging. And I think that's it from me.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chris. My video coming back. There we go. Yeah, so just to touch on some key takeaways, I think, to cover sort of all of the 3 areas that we've spoken through today. So as James mentions, it's the year of the digital transformation. Enterprises are investing in technology when they're looking at improving their operations and helping with cost savings and efficiencies. And, it's clear that there's a desire to invest in new technologies that can help them support that. And connectivity and AI are really those technologies that they're focused on investing in. Without the networks there, then these digital transformation efforts can't and won't happen. The networks aren't there to support AI, so those 2 technologies really go hand in hand when enterprises are looking at how they transform and focus their efforts for the future. I think it's also pretty clear that integrated marketing is really important. Enterprises are looking at lots of different channels when they're trying to identify vendors and when they're making that decision with more scrutiny, I suppose, around budgets and the amount of money that they have and the investments that they're making. It's really important that they're making decisions based on lots of different materials and have that to hand. So, whether that's looking at the media, attending events, email marketing, social awards, they want that validation. Reputation is really important. So making sure vendors are key players within the industry is super important. They want to be rest assured that they're making the right investment with the right partner. And then it's pretty clear that industry analysts have such a huge influence on the technology buying decisions of enterprises, from identify partners all the way through to selection. It's clear that third-party validation from those experts is really important for enterprises and vendors do need to think about how they engage with analysts, and make the most of that influence as part of the technology buying process. So now we can hand it over to questions. Can see if anyone has popped some in the box, and we can spend some time discussing some of the research and the findings. James, I can see a question that's come here through for you. So, why do you think enterprises are adopting technologies that support operational efficiencies over driving new revenues? Is it a sign of the market that they're prioritizing cost savings?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. I think a lot of it stems to that kind of ROI point that you made in your presentation, and it's a general point that, it's a term that we're all really familiar with. Quite often, overhauling operations is the best way to see the quickest return on their investment. That's what we hear from enterprises. And I mean, it varies from sector to sector, but for a lot, you know, automating things, for example, creates a really good way of using the tools that they've already got without kind of having to invest in new tools. And even though I think it was on your the research that you guys did, there is interest in new lines of business and stuff, and certainly it was we got back from people that is an area that they want to invest in, but ultimately that kind of driving new lines of business and new opportunities is less important than making sure that their existing technology is digitized and is fit for purpose. And that ties into, again, if you look at the types of technology that they're focused on, connectivity being such a big part because that ties into so many of the different sectors. And then AI, because it's so pervasive at the moment, obviously it's the type of technology that can really be applied to existing things. So people want a solution that can plug and play into their existing infrastructure. And that, yeah, it's that ROI question, I think, really is the most important thing for them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, something that come up in our research was that element of keeping up with the competition. I think there's no denying that sort of every enterprise is looking at how and where they can implement AI and automation. So I think that is a big driver for this as well, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Because I think the thing is, I'll get a story. We've had it this week. There was I think Metro Bank announced that they were doing something with AI, and then Lloyd's came through, and then it wouldn't shock me if I've got another bank telling me about stuff that's going on. But you kind of have sectors tend to fall together because somebody needs
Mm.
first to go. And then once somebody's gone and made a decision and experimented with AI, and shown that it works, they're like, oh, we can do that. And it drives, that's how innovation is driven as well, like kind of seeing, and I think Chris talked about it a little bit, and you guys, it's definitely in the research that you guys did, that kind of where what your rivals are doing, where industry trends are kind of setting, how that affects
Mm.
how people are making decisions.
Yeah, definitely. Um, there's an analyst relations question here, Chris. I think you're best placed to answer. So, while you mentioned that larger enterprises are relying on analysts more, it's clear smaller enterprises are realizing their importance as well. What do you think it is about the analyst community that makes them the first port of call?
I think you've kind of touched on it a couple of times, Chloe, as well. I think it's that, validation for technology purchasing decisions, right? Sometimes you're spending hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars on a particular technology when you're putting it into your IT stack, and you've got to get that decision right. And so, having someone who really understands a particular technology area and is talking to vendors every day about their kind of development plans, but also talking to end users of those technologies and understanding how they're working in the real world is really important in validating those decisions. And yeah, so I think that sort of deep knowledge that analysts have, and they're not just of like the big like incumbents in a
Mm.
particular technology area, also maybe like vendors that have a niche solution that works particularly well for SMBs, or those that knowledge of all the vendors in a particular technology area is really important, and helping the end users to choose the technology that works best for the particular challenge that they're trying to solve.
Mm.
So yeah, I would say that's the main reason that I think we and certainly the research plays that out. I think we do see that even though there is maybe slightly more influence in those larger firms, we still see that those smaller companies are still using analysts for, you know, vendor awareness, vendor selection, and so on. So
Yeah, I suppose it's the safety of it, right? You can make the investment with analysts and know that you're getting some good solid advice, and some understanding of, you know, the other players in the market and who's going to help best for certain areas and certain technology sort of criteria that an enterprise might have.
yeah, exactly. And I think there's people can get like caught up with, you know, who's in the Gartner Magic Quadrant or who's in the Forrester Wave, and I actually think it's more in those advisory sessions when analysts are, you know, explaining to buyers which particular technology might solve an acute challenge that they have. I think that's where there's the most influence, and I think, you know, it means that niche vendors that, like I say, have solutions that solve more like a particular challenge that buyers have, can still capitalize on that interest, on that influence by just making sure analysts know who they are and know where their solution really makes sense, and so that analysts know when to recommend their technology to a buyer.
Definitely. Wonderful. I can just see one last question here. I'm happy to take this, but James might appreciate your input on this one as well. So, enterprises clearly want to see the value of AI, but are cautious of it. What do you think vendors need to do to reassure them of the potential? I think really it's around showcasing, you know, the your experience really, of working with enterprises, and being able to, you know, demonstrate your expertise, you know, your technology prowess, and, you know, highlighting any customers that you've worked with. And, you know, metrics are always important, right? A company is more likely to invest in a player that, you know, has customers, and, you know, can openly talk about, you know, the return on investment that they've seen as a result. So I think for vendors that are supporting with AI and automation, and are looking at targeting enterprises, they really need to focus on, you know, that demonstrating their experience, and, you know, how they're working with enterprises, especially given, as I said, the economic climate and more scrutiny around these tech buying decisions. It's all about, you know, demonstrating what you can do. I think that plays into how you cover technology, James, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing is with AI, there's so much noise around it. I mean, last time I saw you, Chloe, was when we were out in Barcelona, right?
Mm.
At Mobile World Congress. And despite it being a telecoms conference, there was AI signs everywhere.
Hmm.
It's leaking into every other tech sector as well and having such an impact. So I think for the vendors who are selling AI or trying to support their enterprise partners, they need to be able to show that they are really the experts, that they're not just talking about AI because it's the trend to talk about AI, that they actually have something to offer to the conversation. And the best way of doing that is demonstrating how you've managed to transform other enterprises. So case studies and things like that. That tech in action piece that you mentioned is such a key part, I think, of how your research showed. It's how decision makers reach it. Analysts are really, really important, but then that kind of case study tech in action piece is so important too. And then also the idea of kind of showing that leadership and that understanding of how it can really transform different industries is really important, because the fact is that since the ChatGPT moment, we've had loads of kind of aha, and AI has actually moved very, very fast. So it went from just being kind of automation, now a lot of the conversations around agentic AI and things like that.
Hmm.
But that's only in 2 years. It's moving faster than the technology window tends to move. And because of that, they need to kind of keep on top of what their solution is and be really focused in on the different sectors that they want to target and be able to sell that story of why their solution can help that sector transform. Because ultimately, if you're a decision maker, you just want to know where that ROI lies, or how your business is going to benefit, how it's going to transform the way you operate, or how it's going to improve the service that you're offering.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's whilst I suppose AI is having its moment now, it's not to say that businesses haven't been using AI for the past few years and they don't have that experience already, right? So I think whilst it's sort of in its moment, being able to capitalize on that and showcase what you have been doing over the last few years, because let's be honest, AI has been being implemented well before sort of the last year or so where it's really had its moment, I think is, yeah, as you say, super important.
Yeah, definitely. That's the other thing about AI. We kind of talk about the ChatGPT moment, and it was such a significant moment because I think it caught the zeitgeist, the public awareness. But ultimately, that kind of what was AI before that? It was different forms of automation, or it was different forms of kind of things like chatbots and stuff like that that we'd already seen that were using AI. It's just the generative side of it that's kind of really changing the picture. But we're
Yeah.
moving so fast. I mean, as somebody who writes about it every day, I'm amazed by how quickly we've moved in the last 2.5 years from where generative AI really became realistic. And funnily enough, we were talking about quantum before. That's where I'm really interested to see whether quantum moves faster once we hit that quantum moment, which probably won't be until 2028 maybe, or
Mm.
like it's quite far down the line, but it's going to be really, really interesting to see whether that, because of the nature of quantum, has the same impact, whether it's suddenly like, oh, but we've been doing quantum a while. It's like, no, you haven't really.
Yeah.
Or but when people say that about AI, it's true, they have. It's just it's a different ball game now.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Wonderful. Okay, I think that's all the questions that we've had through. Thank you everyone for joining today. The session will be available on demand. And if you have any questions or want to get in touch with any of us, please do head to the Tech Informed and the CC Group websites to get in touch. And yeah, thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.